Good evening and welcome to the October 28th meeting of the Civil Service Commission. May we have roll call, please?
I'll check right now. Commissioner Yakubian?
Yes.
Commissioner Gazarian?
Here.
Commissioner Abkarian?
Here.
Chair Devine?
Here.
For the record, Commissioner Manukian is absent.
Okay, thank you. May we have next item, please?
Minutes. For the meeting of September 9, 2015, Commissioner Manukian was absent and is therefore abstained. At this time, I need a first and a second.
So move. Second.
We have unanimous consent except the ones that weren't here and abstained.
For the
Next
meeting,
item.
for the meeting of October 14, 2015, with the exception of Commissioner Yakubian, who was absent, I need a first and a second.
So move. Second.
Unanimous consent with one abstain. Next item, please.
Oral communications.
I have no cards. Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to address the commission on items not on the agenda? Seeing none, we'll move to the next item.
Recruitment and examination report.
Mr. Doyle.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, this report illustrates our current recruitment activity. In this report, you see the positions that are being recruited for, filing period, the exam dates, as well as the staff assigned. Right now, the load has remained steady at about 50. Again, as we complete and fill some positions, we get new ones due to vacancies and that sort of thing. So otherwise, this is a note and file item. If the Commission has questions, we'd be happy to try and answer them. Otherwise, we'll note and file this.
Thank you. Any questions? Seeing none, we'll move to the next item, please.
Eligible list established.
Mr. Doyle.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, this too is a note and file. This is the lists that have been established since our last meeting. As you can see, we have three, two promotional, and then one that is open and promotional. You notice the open and promotional, typically we have a much higher candidate pool. The far right column shows the total number of candidates who make the eligibility list. Once again, an illustration of just how competitive and challenging our processes are, where you have a large number of applications, and then by the time we get through all the various processes, we have a relatively short list to select from. So anyway, this too is a note and file item. If you have questions on these exams, move on.
Okay. Any questions? Seeing none, we'll move to the next item.
Job bulletin for approval, Fire Battalion Chief.
Mr. Doyle.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, this is a job bulletin for approval for the position of Fire Battalion Chief within the Fire Department. As I usually say, that not every job bulletin does come before the Commission. Per the rules, there are a couple exceptions to that which require us to bring these bulletins to you for your approval, and one of which is anytime we have a safety promotional position, a police or fire, where it's a promotional type exam, because of the technical nature and how competitive they are and really how important they are to the organization, we bring all of these to you for your approval. In addition to that, this recruitment does have one deviation from the existing approved class specification, and that has to do with this incident command certification strike team certification that we're requesting that it be, instead of a requirement, that it be a certification that is required to have as a means of passing probation once the appointment has been made. Proposing this change just because sometimes these classes that are available to get these certifications are not necessarily convenient, and candidates may not be available to take them in time for the posting of the exam and the screening of the application. So we're asking that be allowed to proceed without that particular minimum requirement. Also with this recruitment, in fact, similar to what occurred 2 weeks ago with the police captain bulletin, fire chief and fire department's proposing to eliminate the internal panel, the community panel for this particular recruitment as well. Again, if this were the department head, the fire chief, or even the deputy fire chief, we would certainly want to have some level of community involvement and certainly interaction involving internal review, maybe other department heads and such. But at this level, really the focus is finding somebody who has the technical abilities, the tactical command of an incident. And really the focus of this exam will be just that very thing, tactical exercise as well as a supervisory exercise, which really those are the two main elements of a fire battalion chief. So with that, this bulletin is for your review and approval, and we have representatives from our fire department here, the Battalion Chief Tom Probst, as well as Ms. Hunanian from my staff, who worked on this bulletin.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Doyle. Any questions on this job spec, or job bulletin?
Nope.
Sina?
I do have one comment.
Aaron.
As I mentioned last week, I'm very uncomfortable with eliminating the transparency which the community panel will give. Usually the main purpose of a civil service commission or a civil service process is to allow transparency and make sure that the public has comments, and that's the reason that there was a public kind of community panel. So I will tell you that I have some reservation having continuously these items coming in front of us, eliminating the community panel portion of it. I understand the explanation. I understand that there needs to be more of a tactical requirement, and that's the reason it's being eliminated. But if it's eliminated every single time we bring this type of a bulletin in front of us, then it really undercuts the transparency that the community panel is supposed to give to the process itself. So that's the only comment that I have at this point.
Unless the Civil Service Commission, being made up of appointees of duly elected city council members, fulfills that role which a community panel may have in the past been delegated or entrusted with fulfillment of. I recall, as Commissioner Abkarian has stated, a similar matter that came up at the last meeting where the community panel was eliminated. Is that what you were referring to, Commissioner?
Yeah. Yes.
I was satisfied with the concern expressed there, which wasn't really a concern, but rather a mode of operation to go about finding the most qualified individual without any deference to, for lack of a better word, politics. I don't know what the reasoning behind it here is beyond that which you've just shared with us, Mr. Doyle. But I believe that this commission can fulfill the role that perhaps Commissioner Abkarian can set forth that perhaps would be missing by taking out the community panel involvement. If there is such an involvement that the community representatives were doing, maybe we ought to take up the slack if we're doing away with that, or at least approving the doing away with that as being requested of us. Those are just thoughts of mine.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, again, I truly wish Chief Fish were here to address this, but he's traveling at the moment. But you know, my understanding his concerns is really the focus on this job really has to be, you know, the life-saving, the technical competence of the individuals who are considered for this. The community panels are vitally important for managerial positions and certainly our executives' positions. And we do have relatively new executives heading both our police department and fire department. Both went through processes that did contain community panels, and I think for that level it was absolutely vital to have that. This is really the third level down from the chief's position. This is the incident commander, and whether there's a concern you raised about politics or anything like that, that's certainly a valid point. But I think the most important thing for this process to maintain the integrity of this process is to really focus on the key element of this job, which is the command of an emergency scene. And what we and plan to do on both the tactical exercise and the managerial supervisory exercise is to have raters, interviewers, evaluators, whatever you want to call them, from the outside. And these will be people from other jurisdictions coming in with no biases, no predispositions. They're not going to know these candidates. And from a test administration standpoint, often that's the most valid way to conduct an exam. As I said before, when you get to the higher levels, the department heads, most people in the communities and the people that we would get from other cities to come and sit on these panels, a lot of them are going to know one another, and the same goes for when we do have a community panel. There's going to be some level of interaction that all of these folks would have with potentially with some or many of the candidates who are participating in this. So I think what we're seeking here is really just the most objective means of identifying, and again that would not only exclude community panel members but any internal panel members as well from having any type of bias or predisposition towards anyone. We would anticipate maybe a half a dozen or so candidates for this job, and from there, it obviously will be a very well structured and very, very objective exam, and that's really what our goal would be. So I certainly respect whatever direction the commission wants to go on this, but I will say if we want a process that is absolutely objective, it would be the fashion with which it's presented to you today.
Okay. Do you have anything to add?
I don't.
Okay. I concur and have the same feelings as Commissioner Abkarian in terms of doing away with a level of transparency by having the citizen panel eliminated. I certainly respect Commissioner Gazarian's and Matt's explanation of why they feel this is a better way, but in the staff report you indicate that the chief believes that this change to the selection process will allow for a more adequate evaluation of the candidates. And I'd like to find out exactly what you mean by more adequate. Why is that process more adequate than having the citizen panel included in the process?
I can try and answer that, but perhaps Chief Probst could assist as well. But again, I think it goes down to the core elements of this job and what we're looking for. It's not necessarily someone who is going to be out there giving speeches to the community. I mean, that may happen. That may be a side benefit of someone for this job. But really, what we want this person to be able to do is manage, a fire battalion, which is, an entire shift. This person will be in charge of the shift at any given period of time for 24 hours. Every call that comes in, typically they don't go on the minor calls, but if it's a structure fire or a significant traffic collision or something like that, the battalion chief will be required to be out there calling the shots and making what's going to amount to be life and death decisions. Now, there will be occasions where this person will be asked to go meet with the Chamber of Commerce or give a presentation on fire prevention and something like that. And from that standpoint, it would be good to have somebody with that level of engagement with the community. But I think priority-wise, what we're looking for is truly that incident commander. And Chief Probst, if you want to add anything to that.
Thank you. Chair Devine and members of the Commission, thank you very much for addressing this issue. And I appreciate and concur with what Mr. Doyle has mentioned. Just to highlight a couple issues. One, by removing the community panel portion, we're going to focus on two elements. One will be the tactical portion. The second will be a supervisory administrative portion. Each of those segments will be allowed to now be a longer time to get a true evaluation of that candidate's abilities to, one, tactically address emergency situations properly, and secondly, focus on the daily admin details dealing with personnel and personnel issues, which is critically important to us to make sure that we deal with those fairly and effectively for all of our employees. Regarding the community service element, I can assure you that every member of the fire chief's command staff is highly involved in our community. That has changed probably in the last 10 years. I've been a battalion chief now 7 years, and all of us as command staff members are involved in community organizations, community associations at a higher level than ever before. So Chief Fish is wanting to focus on the two main elements of being a proficient commander at the scene of emergencies, to address the tactics and strategy, to make sure that emergencies are handled effectively for our community, and then secondly, dealing with the personnel scenarios and issues to handle those properly. So we will have community involved questions as part of our questioning of the candidate, just not that specific panel.
Okay.
Ask. Thank you, Chief. You mentioned the tactical exercise, correct?
Yes, sir.
Are you suggesting that the community panel is being eliminated and in its place the tactical exercises? No.
No, sir.
That was always there, right?
Correct.
But so what did you mean when you said that the chief is focusing more on the tactical exercise while eliminating the community panel? Is this now going to be more comprehensive tactical exercise? And more importantly, when you have professional supervisory panel interview, where is the interaction between subordinates and a battalion chief in this selection process, qualifications, search, if you will, for the right candidate? Where is that aspect of it?
Well, there'll be one segment of the exam will be a supervisory portion, which the candidate will be presented with a supervisory issue.
Right.
There'll be a written exercise that will most likely support that issue, and they'll have to work their way through that scenario to come to the correct conclusion of handling those supervisory problems and issues.
Thank you. Chair Devine, if I may, if what I am sensing to be a substantive concern of yours and Commissioner Abkarian, if that is a substantive concern, not genuine because I know it is, but real concern, then I guess the question I have for the chief is how critical it is that this be approved this evening as opposed to being postponed. And I pose the same question to Chief Examiner Doyle as well, as opposed to being postponed for the next session so that the chief can be here, rather than, forgive the use of the phrase, the messenger being the receiver of the brunt of the concerns here that I see from this side of the dais.
I would go along that. I also would like to mention, at least, I do have a sincere concern about it, not only from the standpoint of the process, in terms of, whether it's adequate or not to get the best candidate without the citizen panel. I'm concerned about the other side of it, the fairness to the candidates. For years and years, the battalion chiefs have had an exam that included 3 elements, the 3 interview panels. And now, for this one exam, the prospective candidates aren't going to have that. That's a change for them. And I know this has been passed by the, I think it's the GMA,
Yes.
to evaluate it, and there's been no response, I don't believe, Mr. Doyle. But still, from a fairness standpoint, and that's what this commission's all about, it's fairness to the employees, to the candidates. I have a question whether it's appropriate to make this change all of a sudden like this. And so that's my concern also on the other side, as far as being fair to the candidates, that they are expecting one type of exam. They may feel that with the citizen panel, they'll have a better chance or an equal chance with the other candidates, and without that panel, it may impact their ability to perform well on the exams.
I see Commissioner Abkarian wants to be heard. I'll reserve a brief reply I have. Go ahead.
Let me just make one comment. I think it's more of a general comment, if you don't mind. I don't agree that the only time that the community panel or internal panel is necessary is for people who have to make public appearances. I mean, that really, for me, that doesn't really cut it. I mean, that shouldn't be the barometer of how we pick community panel compared to not picking them. If they're going in front of the community, they're going to give speeches, we give community panel. If they're not going to give speeches, then we won't give community panel. I think that cannot be the barometer that we set to do these or not to do these. I think the community panel has a right, and my understanding, Mr. Doyle, is that you pick the community panel. Is it not true?
That's correct.
Okay.
It's done by the staff.
Right, and then you basically review, make
exam.
sure that they're not biased, make sure that they don't have any prejudice, and you basically pick the best panel you believe would fit this particular.
We do our best.
Yeah, well, that's what I meant. I mean, that's all you can do. And so the community panel is important because it interviews parties based on their experience of being in this community for 30, 40, 50 years sometimes, and then they gauge if this individual is fit to serve in this community. I know a lot of people that are tactically the best people in the United States, but they're not fit to serve in Glendale. Based on the makeup of the community, based on what we have, based on the challenges in the community. So having somebody just having a tactical knowledge and being a great supervisor, and all of a sudden, maybe that person hates all white people. We can't have something like that in the community. I think community panel is important not only to ensure that your speeches and your communication with the community as well, but that this individual, based on the experience of the panel, would be a good fit for this community. And so that's what I want to say. I don't know if you want to postpone this or not. That's up to you. I understand what the reasoning is. I'm again, having this now two meetings in a row makes me feel very uncomfortable. I was uncomfortable last meeting. I deferred that a little bit, and I voted on that. But to have another one come in front of us just a week later, or not a week later, I'm sorry, 2 weeks later, makes me very uncomfortable. I have to say that. So with that, again, if you want to postpone it and get some more information on it, that gives the association a little bit more time to review it, to ensure that the association then is given another bite at the apple, so to speak, and could review it for 2 weeks. And if they want to come, they'll know that we feel very strongly about it. They could come. If they don't show up, then at least you've given them another bite at the apple, so to speak, and then they can do whatever they want. That's my 2 cents.
I'm glad you mentioned the last meeting, Commissioner Abkarian, because that is where I was going to go. I can speak for myself only. I'm not comfortable for us to adopt a position at one meeting and adopt an opposite position at the next meeting. It seems to me some of the concerns that you just expressed, Commissioner Abkarian, had I heard those concerns, perhaps I didn't hear you well last time, I would have been much more apprehensive in going along with that which was being proposed last time. But we voted to allow what, in Mr. Doyle's words, a relatively new chief of a department, the police department, that last time, the latitude or the independence to put measures in place to select that chief's his command staff by bringing an outside panel of examiners and the internal and whatnot. I guess my question and my uncomfortableness, my discomfort is, what is it so different between the police chief asking for what he asked and received to now a fire chief asking for essentially the same thing, and we're saying, wait a minute, this is now happening 2 meetings in a row. I go back to our caveat from last meeting where we all agreed that there was a time frame, Mr. Doyle, I think it was a year or 2 years, and that it was within the province of the Civil Service Commission to, the next time the matter came up, to ask that it be added or to maintain jurisdiction, if you will, over the subject matter, but to allow the exercise to be carried out and see what result will come of it. That's all.
Yes, I apologize. I was actually absent during the last meeting, and having heard, having not been privy to what occurred during the last meeting, and having heard today the concerns, I must say that I echo and share in those concerns raised. And I would also, I was also surprised to hear about the distinction between a position where public interaction was part of the job requirements versus not, and the panel vis-a-vis those two positions. I agree with Commissioner Abkarian. There should not be a distinction made. So my recommendation, or I would be more, I would like to go with another delay if possible, if that's not going to jeopardize anything, and further consider this issue.
And for the record, I'm going to remain consistent with the decision of the Commission, because the decision of the Commission was to give that latitude to Chief Castro of the Police Department. Despite the fact that I share your concerns, Commissioner Abkarian, I don't believe in separating one department from another and giving one department less latitude than the other. So I'm going to remain consistent and hope that the fire department will win you folks over as to the concerns you've raised, which are concerns of mine as well. But I believe that it would behoove us to be consistent, and we did, after all, allow Chief Castro latitude on the same matter. I think it was a matter of command staff selection last time, and this, to me, I don't know very well the distinction in the fire department setting, but I view it as a command staff position.
Yes, sir.
So just for the record, thank you.
Do you have anything to add?
I don't. I think, Commissioner McCubian, I would second if we can postpone it for 2 weeks, give the association one more, again, bite at the apple, I keep saying this, and then in 2 weeks, if there are no public comments, there's no public issues, and no one really has any more comments, I think we'll be consistent then at that point to take this action and see if this is what we want to do. I do agree with you, Commissioner Kazarian, that we did vote on this last time. I don't want to be cemented into a position of not being able to change my mind.
No, of course.
Like running for a presidential election and saying you're flip-flopping. I mean,
but not in the next meeting, I would hope.
Maybe I should just do a disclaimer and say I reserve the right to flip-flop if I need to. But again, I was uncomfortable the last meeting, if you recall, and I'm uncomfortable now. So if it doesn't delay a lot of things, I would not mind waiting 2 weeks. Now, do we have a meeting in 2 weeks or not?
Well, we're going to discuss that later because we have some scheduling.
I never thought I would be the establishment guy sitting on this commission. I mean, I think I've been known for a lot of things, but this was not one of them.
Is there a urgency to get this?
Mr. Chair, I'd probably defer to Ms. Unanian and Chief Probst. Prior to saying that, I do want to say that it is odd that this happened, 2 successive meetings, and I absolutely want to assure the Commission that this is not a trend of any sort, because we all see and recognize the value of community panels in these types of managerial positions. And the issue relative to the candidates' expectations, again, Chief Probst can probably articulate that, but I'm certain that was the exam process was articulated to the candidates. And frankly, I sort of grew up in this organization doing these types of exams like 20 years ago. And back then, there was not community panels involved. That's been something that we've done in the last 5 to 10 years at this level. So it wouldn't be that much of a departure from the past. But again, we recognize how important that is. And at this point, I'll probably defer to Chief Probst, Ms. Hunani, and as far as whether it would make sense to defer this for our next meeting, or to proceed ahead and include some element of a community panel in this.
Chair Devine and Commissioners, just two points. One is the GMA has been presented with this change, and they have no objection to the change per Ms. Hananian. Additionally, by the end of December, we'll have 2 openings at the battalion chief level with the retirement of Battalion Chief Ron Gully. And currently there's 1 opening. And these are critical positions, command level positions that we need to have filled to maintain our command staff and to run the organization. I'm just putting that just for your advisement of the timeline.
If you haven't appointed anyone by that point in time, you still can put in acting VCs, right?
No, sir. No.
So that means that you will absolutely have nobody at that level?
We would fill those spots by the remaining battalion chiefs. Currently, there's 5 of us with 2 openings. That would leave 3 to fill those other 2 spots.
So if there's a delay by another month, would that cripple the ability of the fire department to operate?
That would be a big effect on us. Yes, sir.
I see we have a tentative schedule for the first portion of the exam to occur on December the 2nd. If we were able to schedule another commission meeting shortly, within 1 to 2 weeks, would that affect that schedule?
I don't believe so. I mean, it just delay by that process,
Because
by the posting, and then just push it back.
Why don't you?
It may be difficult as we get closer in towards the holidays of obtaining raters, but we won't know that until we put the request out.
Ms. Harnan?
If I can just address also one thing. Chair Devine, you mentioned the unfairness factor to the individuals who are used to essentially having a community internal panel. Even though this is a GMA classification, as a courtesy, it was sent to the Glendale Firefighters Association, and no concerns have been raised by them as well. So they are very much very well aware of the change that we're trying to make. And as we pointed out a couple of weeks ago, I think Commissioner Abkarian, you had mentioned that this being a concern that next bulletin that, may not come forth to you. Because this is a promotional safety exam, it will come to you. So maybe we look at this exam without the community internal panel, and maybe we look at it and say, you know what, it didn't work very well, but we're trying to basically focus on those two main elements, which is the tactical as well as the supervisory. And given the number of applicants that we are potentially going to get, when you have 3 panels, you are quickly trying to get through each of those panels. This way, if we cut it down to the 2 panels that we're trying to focus on, we will be able to more adequately evaluate those candidates because they will have a longer period of time with each of those panels. And that's critical as well for this examination process. But again, maybe for future exams, we look back and say, well, it didn't work very well. And we can go back to the community panel. I don't know if that'll happen, but that is a possibility.
I have 2 questions. I appreciate that information. Number one, have the candidates themselves, I imagine you know what the candidate pool is at this point, or potential.
I can guess, given the number of individuals who have spoken to me. But
have the candidates, or can they be contacted? I know that you've contacted GMA and
GFFA, because that's where the candidates will be coming from.
But
GFFA.
when you contact them, it's the management of those groups that say yea or nay. I'm sure they don't put it to a vote of the membership or the rank and file. So my question is, number one, would it be possible to contact the candidates or potential candidates themselves? And 2, for this time, since there's a time crunch, as a kind of a compromise, would it be possible to have 1 or 2 citizens? I know generally on the citizen panel you have 5 or 6. Is that correct, Mr. Doyle?
Or we've had as many as 7 or 8 or 9.
Would it be possible to integrate into I guess you call it the supervisory panel, or not the technical panel, but to integrate some citizens in there so you have a mixture of the citizens and the supervisors that are doing the interviewing? So we get some element of the public in there to weigh in on it. Is that a possibility?
That might be
And while you're contemplating that, can the chairman of the commission, Mr. Devine, forgive me for volunteering you, can he monitor or observe these selection process interview sessions as a citizen?
I can answer that. And
what is I don't know the law, but
my answer is that I would not want to, number one. Number 2, it probably wouldn't be wise, because should there be an appeal from one of the candidates, then I would have to recuse myself from that process.
I think forgive me, Chair, I think I heard you, Mr. Doyle, in saying that the first portion of the examination is December 2nd.
Actually, it's the entire portion, if I'm...
The entire.
Everything. It's everything, yes.
And we were told to bring our calendars with us, and I'm thinking our next scheduled meeting ought to be November 11th, but my calendar says Veterans Day. Is the city closed on that day?
Yes.
That's why. Okay.
And as a reminder, we do have a 2-week posting period, so we do need to post the bulletin for a 2-week period. Right. So come this Monday, it was scheduled to post pending your approval. So the candidates would know actually as early as today, because this is a public, the agenda is made public. So they would be notified of the change. If the GFFA hasn't notified them, they would know today.
Commissioner Gazarian, if you don't mind, if I can put my 2 cents in. Could this have come to us earlier? Could this have come to us 2 weeks earlier? Or would you bring these in the last second? I'm just asking you if it could have came to us earlier.
We have talked about having this exam, knowing that Chief Gully will be retiring in the next couple of months. However, with everybody's schedules and trying to get the bulletin drafted and the appropriate notifications made, the timing, appropriate, giving them timely notice. This was the best opportunity.
And Commissioner Abkarian, we just concluded a similar exam, the fire captain, which is the next level below, which was an incredibly complex exam involving a tactical exercise and an interview panel, and it had
a supervisory
exercise. Okay. These are significant exams to put together. I mean, involving anywhere from 10 to 15 outside interview raters organizing, so we can only do one of these.
With that in mind, and with the situation being the way it is, and with all the circumstances, now that the staff knows, I think, what the commission feels about this type of panels and how we feel about it for the future purposes, and that's what my main purpose was, to bring this up, saying, I don't want to come next meeting and get another one with community and internal panel being out. With that, I would, with a bit of a hesitation, wouldn't mind actually approving this today so we can actually move forward. This being a safety position and having 3 battalion chiefs running around trying to do 5 battalion chiefs, and that concerns me as to how the safety of the public will be jeopardized if we do something like that. As such, with that in mind and with the safety of the public in mind, I wouldn't mind actually voting on this particular item tonight.
Would you like to make a motion?
I would make a motion to have it approved.
And a second?
I second.
I just have one comment or question. If we do that, if we approve this tonight, when this comes up again, when we have another BC exam, we get to look at it again.
Absolutely. It's a safety promotional. That's fire battalion chief, that's deputy fire chief, that's fire captain, fire engineer, police sergeant, police lieutenant, police captain, assistant police chief. All of these bulletins come before the commission's review.
So it's not locking us into this. Okay, roll call.
Commissioner Yakubian,
Yes.
Commissioner Gazarian,
Yes.
Commissioner Abkarian,
Yes.
Chair Devine.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Albert. I know you have to leave.
Sorry?
I know you have to leave.
That's okay. No, well, I'll stay.
I can do the closed session right now.
No, we can just go. You can just go. Yeah, that's fine. Thank
Okay.
you. Thank you, though. I appreciate it.
Next item.
Class specification for approval, Power System Series.
Mr. Doyle?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, this is a class specification, essentially a job description for the Power Systems series within Glendale Water and Power. This is a very unique operation within GWP dealing with the scheduling, analysis, acquisition of power services and delivery to the city. What we're having here today is an updating of the specification. Actually, there's 2 parts to this: updating the specification for this, and also adding a new classification to this series. Currently, we have this Power Systems Analyst classification, and we're adding a position at a lower level called Power Systems Associate. And really, this is the effort here is to get more of an entry-level classification for this series. It's a really unique, very important function within GWP, and occasionally we'll have candidates who either come in out of college or work as interns or whatever, and they learn this field, but in order to hire them or promote them to full-time salaried positions, the analyst level requires, I believe, 4 or 5 years experience. And oftentimes we'll have candidates who don't have that level of experience, but we want to hire them. So what we're doing is inserting a position of Power Systems Associate as more of an entry level. The position requires 1 year of relevant experience. And ideally, if that person works out and they learn well and progress, they can move on to analyst. But really, that's the purpose of this. And in the meantime, we did update all the other areas of the existing specification for Power System Analyst. So with that, if you have questions, this does require commission approval. Steve Zern is here from Glendale Water and Power, as is Ramona Boeg, who's the Chief Assistant General Manager, and Steve Nersessian from my staff.
Any questions? Seeing none, is there a motion?
Move.
Second.
Unanimous consent. Thank you, Steve. Good job. Thank you.
Panel? Is there a community panel?
I don't know.
Is there no community panel?
Yeah, no community panel on this one.
Nah.
No, it's not a pull-in. Okay, next item, please.
Reports, past due employee performance evaluations.
Oh, I got a problem here, Matt.
Yeah, Mr. Doyle?
Mr.
I
Chair.
got a real problem.
I think we
This
all
is
have some
our
questions on this one.
regular report indicating past due evaluations. And we have some first notices, second notices, and we do have one third notice, which does require appearance of that particular department head. Mr. Lanzafame is here if you to speak with him. Or if you have questions. Again, it's a note and file item. It's really for your information and really to keep us on our toes and keep us up to speed on our evaluations.
Well, for start, thank you, Chair Devine. Hello, Mr. Lanzafame. For starters, I want to commend those departments that seem to have absolutely no past dues. The City Attorney's Office, the City Treasurer's Office, the Glendale Water and Power, Information Services, the Police Department, and the Public Works Department. What happened?
Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, I have an apology for you and a reason. I do not have an excuse. In this instance, in this particular instance, the employee was moved from one department to another and really reported to the director, my predecessor at the time. About 8 months ago, a deputy director was assigned and took over and just took on a huge task of filling out the staff, trying to learn the transit, and then there were two large, one grant and then a purchase of vehicles. He was simply overwhelmed. I took the department about 5 months ago, and again, here's where there's no excuses. The notices came, got this done, and it didn't get done. So that is my apology to you and my pledge that it will not happen again.
But there are 3 second notices I've noted. Actually 4, a batch of 3 and another one by itself. So 4 second notices. So is it fair to say that these 4 that are second notices will not mature to third notices, not under your added attention?
It is more than fair, and I actually believe 2 of those have been completed since the report, since your report has been generated.
When will the one that is on a third notice be completed?
I have asked them to have it on my desk next week.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Any other questions?
Mr. Chair, I will note that Mr. Lanzafame is a newly appointed department head, and he really is new to that department. He formerly served as our economic development director within the management services department, and he's been placed over as the department head for community development. So he is new to that department. So there's lots of things he's trying to get his hands around at this point.
He's the fixer. I get it.
And from what I've heard, he's doing an outstanding job, so
I've heard that too.
we appreciate your coming in and explaining that.
Thank you very much.
So that's it. Any other questions on it?
I just want to make one comment. When we were here many years ago, we had the third notice, the fourth and fifth. We had 6 months delay many years ago where they didn't do any evaluations, and we have to give a lot of credit to the former commissioner who passed away, Roy Coleman, who pushed this and made this his personal agenda, where every time we came here, he said nothing else is important. Where is the performance evaluations? And took them down from 6 to 7 months sometimes down to where we are today. And I'm looking at some that have none and huge departments. Mm-hmm. So, Commissioner Coleman did make a difference, and
absolutely,
we won't forget.
Thank you. Next item.
Agenda forecast.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, it's at this point that we really do need to look at our next meeting. As I said earlier, the next scheduled meeting is supposed to be the second and the fourth Wednesdays of each month. The next scheduled meeting, November the 11th, is a city holiday, and then the one after that is the day before Thanksgiving, which traditionally the Commission has preferred not to meet on that evening.
I don't think you'll have a quorum.
Excuse me?
I don't think we'll have a quorum on that day.
So, some of the options would be to find another date, and that's That's sometimes complicated given the fact that these meetings are required to be televised, plus we can't bump up against other boards and commissions that are already scheduled here. But
Let me short circuit this, Matt, if I can. Is there anything on your agenda that's pressing that we need to review in the next month?
Before December 9, which would be the next year.
First meeting in December.
I can't think of anything offhand. I'm looking at my staff. They're all here, all the important people who actually run this
Okay,
department.
well, with that in mind, I'd like to make a suggestion.
Yeah.
Russ Kwan is causing trouble.
He is a troublemaker,
Yeah.
this guy. Oh, okay. This is true.
He did cause trouble, didn't he? Yeah.
Thanks, Russ.
Yes,
Thank you.
We do have a matter which involving an examination which could result in an appeal. I don't know as of
Okay.
yet. So the commission may choose to select a date or play it by ear and see if that happens. And if it does happen, then we would certainly want to try to address that sooner rather than
Well,
later.
let's do as you say.
Examination appeals pretty much hold up the process.
Let's play it by ear. If my commissioners agree, we'll go with the first meeting in December as our next meeting. If something comes up in the interim, I'll leave it up to you to put together a meeting we can all attend and resolve the issue.
I think if you stay away from Mondays and Fridays, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday is probably, barring any other commitments. I'm sorry?
Well,
Not Tuesday.
Oh, Tuesday, yeah.
Well,
Well,
here
so,
we
when-
go.
so Thursday, I guess that's,
What's important, us or the council? I don't understand.
well, let me point out, council meeting for Tuesday, November 10th is canceled. So if we have a need, just in general, and does that look like a potential same time, same place, Tuesday, November 10th, as a possibility? And
Colleen,
I
is
will-
that date open for you?
Yes.
Tuesday, November the
And
10th.
it's good for me also.
Okay. I will be in touch with the chair and the rest of you if that has to occur. So
Otherwise, happy Thanksgiving to everyone. Okay, next item.
Civil Service Commission staff comments.
Any comments?
happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving. Next item, please.
Closed session, public employee reinstatement request, assistant parking manager.
Okay. At this point, I believe we ask everyone to adjourn with the exception of those involved in the closed session item.
The TV.
And